Okay, this one is on. So we put this on you.
Hot mic.
We have an extra mic to help out.
Great, great. Let me know if you can't hear.
All right, testing. Yep, I turned that on. So, all right, we will get started.
Great crowd. Great to be here. Thanks everybody for coming. Really, really appreciate that. This is the new book, and it was predicted in 1956 that somebody would write this book. It's taken quite a while, but someone finally did. I was born in 1957, so I guess that was my calling. And people always ask, what inspired you to write this book about the national parks and John D. Rockefeller Jr.? And for me, the main thing was I worked in a number of national parks during my career, and 3 of them, the ones with asterisks, those were all significant Rockefeller parks. The Grand Tetons, Yellowstone, and Great Smoky Mountains, of course, all were either co-created by John D. Rockefeller Jr., or he contributed significantly to their funding and their expansion and existing. So I worked in 3 Rockefeller parks. I met a park ranger in a Rockefeller park. We got married in a Rockefeller park, up Porter's Creek Trail in a grove of old growth forest. It was probably saved by John D. Rockefeller Jr. We honeymooned in a Rockefeller park. Acadia, we spent our honeymoon in Acadia riding carriage roads designed by John D. Rockefeller Jr. So during all this span of my career, it finally started to sink into my thick skull as I kind of wonder who this John D. Rockefeller Jr. guy is, and why did he get involved with national parks, especially the Great Smoky Mountains? Because whenever I read a history of the Great Smoky Mountains, it almost always ended with, and then John D. Rockefeller Jr. gave $5 million and the national park was created. They never say why he did it. And it always seemed kind of curious to me. And there was a barrier to finding out the answer to that question. That is, the Rockefeller archives are in this really weird place. It's one of their old estates on the Hudson River Valley. To get there, you have to make a reservation, you have to apply. There's no place to stay there, there's no place to eat there. Once you get there, it's really nice archives. They treat you like a king. But during my work time, I could never find a week or so to peel away and get up there and really dig into those archives. They're great archives. The Rockefellers never threw anything away. So there's plenty of material to look at. You probably know that John D. Rockefeller Sr. was the richest of all those Gilded Age tycoons. But he wasn't really your stereotypical Gilded Age tycoon. He was a teetotaler, was very religious, very devout Northern Baptist, didn't really like spending money on himself. His wealth actually came not from gasoline for cars, because cars hadn't been invented when he was building his empire. It was kerosene for lamps. So in the greater scheme of human evolution, that kerosene for lamps were actually a pretty big contribution. Allowed people to do things after dark, work, study, do crafts, mend their nets, whatever people do. And he was, I wouldn't say a miser, but he was very stingy, very, very frugal. All the Rockefellers absolutely hated to waste money. His son, Junior, was very different, not a great businessman, kind of awkward, not much of a sense of humor, but again, a teetotaler, very religious, very purpose-driven, very patient, had amazing perseverance. Once he started on something, he never quit. Might take him a while to start on it, but once he got into it, he never quit. He's very, very curious. And because of a change in the laws that govern your inheritance that happened at the time, he inherited all the money. The estate taxes changed during Junior's lifetime, and Senior realized it was going to be very beneficial to give all of his money to his one and only son, rather than wait for him to die and have it go through an estate tax and have a big chunk taken out of it. So when Junior was around 40, his dad gave him all the money, almost all the money. He funded his foundations, which were massive. He funded all his charitable programs to the max, and then he gave all the rest to Junior, which, believe it or not, kind of upset Junior. He'd always wanted to try to make it on his own, and he'd seen what wealth and the publicity that's around that had done to his father, and it was really, nothing but negativity day after day, and called in front of investigations and reporters and Congress and everything. You know how we are. We all want to be famous and rich, but when people are famous and rich, we really like to pick at them. So it was that way, especially with the Rockefellers. His happy place, Junior's happy place, was in Ohio, believe it or not. It was this vast estate that his father purchased and then kept on adding on to year after year. And it's where Junior and Senior bonded by building carriage roads. This was during the country estate period of American history, when rich people had these big estates and they rode around in horses. There weren't cars yet. And it was really the beginning of landscape architecture in America. Have you heard of Frederick Law Olmsted? He was in the same area. He was doing the same things. They knew Olmsted from Central Park, and they were kind of emulating Olmsted's work by building these beautiful carriage roads that conformed to the landscape and didn't just go from point A to point B. They provided the user with a series of views and experiences. The smartest thing Junior ever did, since he was kind of shy and reclusive, was he married Abby, who was an extrovert and witty and charming and just fun, bubbly, and kids loved her and were always crawling all over her. She was the yeast in the Rockefeller bread, and she just filled their homes and their art with their homes with beautiful art, modern art. She was a great collector. She started the Museum of Modern Art. And actually, Junior's work with national parks and conservation came because of Abby. Because in 1908, Abby was pregnant with Nelson Rockefeller, who would become the Vice President of the United States. And she was having a difficult pregnancy in 1908. And her doctor, like 2 months before she was ready to deliver, said, good luck, with the delivery and the rest of your pregnancy, but I've decided to spend the summer in Maine. And, they were a bit taken aback. They were the Rockefellers. They probably could have found some way to persuade Dr. Thomas to stick around for an extra few weeks, but they weren't like that. They really weren't like that. They said, well, I guess we'll be spending the summer in Maine too. So it was really Nelson and Abby that brought the whole family to Mount Desert Island in Maine, the future site of Acadia National Park. And they really took to it. It was a beautiful place. It's got the ocean, it's got mountains, it's got all these lakes. And Nelson was born, and he was healthy. He was born on his grandfather's birthday. And they were lucky enough to find this cozy little cottage that was for sale, and moved into there. Each generation of Rockefellers was probably a little less frugal than the ones before. So Junior was very frugal too, but he did spend money on homes and these estates because he wanted to build these carriage roads. He just loved building those carriage roads. So he started building those in Maine. But as time went on, Mount Desert Island became a little too popular. People were moving in from all over and building second homes. Can you imagine that happening any place else beside that? I mean, what a shock, huh? So yeah, they found this beautiful place. Everybody wanted to have a summer home there. They're building them like right on tops of the mountains, right on the seashore, right on the lake shore, kind of making a mess of the place. And then they had to have wood to build all these houses, of course. So the timber companies were moving in, and the loggers were moving in, and a lot of the people who'd lived there for a while started getting concerned. So this grassroots citizens group formed. the Hancock County trustees for public reservations, and they started taking land by donation, taking money by donation and buying land. And pretty soon they'd amassed 3,000 acres, which is about 1/10 of what Acadia National Park is today. The main shakers and movers were George B. Dorr and Charles Eliot. And George B. Dorr was kind of an eccentric bachelor, Boston Brahmin, big mustache, kind of looked like somebody out of an English murder mystery. Very passionate, spent all his money on this preserve. He just fell in love with conservation, spent all his money, all the family's wealth, went into hock doing it. And Charles Eliot was the president of Harvard, so he knew everybody, had a lot of leverage, and they were really proud of this preserve, this 3,000 acres they put together, and they had this kind of state document that protected the preserve until people started looking for ways how to chip away at that document that made it legal to preserve this and for it never to be developed. So Dorr and Eliot got really nervous. So what are we going to do? And Dorr had the idea, well, let's make it a national park. If we make it a national park, nobody can ever take it away from us. So he went to Washington, D.C. This was 1914. He was in Washington, D.C., going all over the capital area, all over town, looking for the office for the National Park Service. 1914. Could not find it. No, there were national parks, but no National Park Service office. Anybody know why that might be? Hadn't been invented yet. There were national parks, but they were all managed by different agencies. So it was Horace Albright and Stephen Mather who were in Washington at that time trying to create a National Park Service. And George B. Dorr ran into them. They started talking. They liked the idea of creating this national park in Maine. But then they started looking at his deeds and looking at his maps. They said, yeah, but you might have some more work to do. For the federal government to accept these deeds, they're going to have to be verified all the way back to the first transaction, over 100 years. And your boundaries are kind of jagged and don't really make much ecological sense. So we're going to have you fill out these boundaries. And also there's inholdings in the park, and we would like you to purchase those before we take this national monument and make it part of our park system. So Dorr went back to Maine and talked to Eliot, and they were even more nervous now because this was going to take a lot of money, a lot of lawyers, a lot of realtors, a lot of work, and they were tapped out. I mean, George B. Dorr was tapped out. Eliot never had any money. Fortunately, they did know a guy, lived just down the shore, John D. Rockefeller Jr., so they approached him, and his first reaction was, why would we want to do that? Create a national park here, bring in tourists, bring in cars, bring in litter. Ironically, Junior hated cars. He was always a horse person. Absolutely hated automobiles. Even when in New York City, he drove in an electric car, believe it or not. Even though he was the son of the Standard Oil magnate. But Junior was an open-minded guy, and this George B. Dorr and Eliot, they started talking to him, and they said, well, these national parks are really great. Can we give you a hand? You okay? Yeah. Said these national parks are great. They preserve the landscape, they preserve the animals, all the plants. People really love them because people live in cities now, and they get stressed out, and it's dirty and noisy and grimy. They need a place to go and relax, take a vacation to. Just like you did. When you had your anxiety problems and you had your depression problems, you had this estate to go to. And that's what he would do when he would have these collapses. He would just go to these estates and do manual labor, plant trees, chop wood, build carriage roads until, 6 months, a year later, he was ready to get back at it. So I said, yeah, this is kind of like an estate for the average person. And he grew into that idea. He built more and more carriage roads. They also told him when they were trying to entice him into this national park idea that once we have this national monument in Maine, man, Junior, we're going to need a lot more carriage roads. So I think there was a little bit of enticement there. But as time went on, people started complaining about his carriage roads. They said, you know, those carriage roads are great for you rich people who have all the time in the world just to trot around on your horses. But, you know, us townies and us tourists, you know, we want to drive our automobiles. You know, we want to be able to get into the park in a couple hours and get out of the park in a couple hours. We don't even have horses anymore. Then Junior, again, he was open-minded. He listened to them, and he started building these beautiful auto roads, beautiful roads. Just as careful with those as he was with his carriage roads. And they also had the side benefit. He figured if he had lots of auto roads, then people wouldn't drive their cars on his carriage roads. So, you know, there's always a little give and take in these things. I said he was a perfectionist. One of his motor roads goes around the coast of Maine, Acadia National Park, if you've been there. And there was a naval radio listening station out on this peninsula. It's where they listened to all the ships out there. And Junior wanted the road to go out on that peninsula, and he didn't want the Navy station to be in the way. So he approached the Navy and said, I'd like you to move your Navy station. Of course, they thought he was kidding, but he kept on chipping away at it, didn't get very far until he offered to build this really nice new naval station. Beautiful, but just like the officers' quarters looked like the mansions that all the gazillionaires lived in. And the enlisted men's quarters looked like these beautiful townhouses and apartments out right on the ocean, out on this beautiful place. And finally, the Navy caved, and he built Ocean Drive, which if you get up to Acadia, you got to do that. And he really blended with the National Park Service. He almost became like a third assistant director. The Park Service, which is famous for their landscape architecture, actually learned a lot about landscape architecture from John D. Rockefeller Jr. He'd been doing it all along. Their first roads were fairly clumsy affairs, and you know he really showed how to use landscape architecture in road building. So that was Acadia, became a national monument, then a national park. Closer to home, 1923, our friends Ann and Willis Davis had just gone on vacation to Yellowstone National Park. Coming back on the train, and Ann says to Willis, you know, the Yellowstone was nice, the West was nice, big mountains, yada, yada, yada. But, you know, I think our Great Smoky Mountains are really just as beautiful. I don't see why we can't have a national park here in the Smokies. And her husband, Willis, was an experienced and intelligent husband. So he said, well, if that's the way you feel, Ann, once we get back to Knoxville, I'll look into it. And look into it they did. Ann actually ran for state legislature, became only the third woman elected to the state legislature. And Willis, he was already a member of like the Auto Club and the Chamber of Commerce, and he formed the Great Smoky Mountains Conservation Association, and they started pushing for this national park. Everybody was crazy about this national park. Most of them were crazy about the national park because they saw the economic opportunities that would create. This was, you know, in the 20s. Knoxville wasn't the richest city in the world, wasn't the poorest either, but people were always looking for ways to boost the economy. They saw hotels and restaurants and curio shops and all those things that tourism bring. And there were also conservationists too. The hikers, the artists, they all loved the Great Smoky Mountains already, and they were saddened to see all the clear cutting that was going on in the mountains, all the old growth forests being removed, and the whole mountainside just denuded. So they were on board for creating this park. Everybody was excited about this park, but they had some huge obstacles to overcome. Ironically, one of the obstacles was at that time, everybody wanted a national park near their homes. There were 30 different areas in the central and southern Appalachians that wanted to become the next national park. And the competition was brutal. And they formed the Southern Appalachian National Park Commission, and they toured all these areas, went around, toured these areas. They were wined and dined. You know, they were celebrities. They'd show up in town. They'd get like the local guides. You know, they'd get Wiley Oakley, somebody like that, to take them out, show them the sights. And this went on for some time. But after a while, the Smokies boosters realized that nobody had come to the Smokies yet. Nobody. And that it was actually getting kind of late in the campaign. And the Smokies hadn't even made the short list of these 30 areas. So they heard this commission was meeting in Asheville at the Grove Park Inn. So they jumped in their cars and they just roared off to Asheville. And they interrupted their meeting. They said, "We got to tell you about these Great Smoky Mountains before you make your final decision, because there can only be one park." So they told them about the Smokies. They had the Jim Thompson photos. They showed them that. And the commission said, "Yeah, that looks pretty nice. You got beautiful mountains, all this biodiversity, this old growth forest. We'll send somebody out there." And they did. And the hiking club took them up on Mount LeConte, and they saw a beautiful sunrise from Myrtle Point. Had a great time. They were impressed. They got back together and they voted on out of all these 30 areas who the winner would be. And it wasn't the Smokies. It was Shenandoah. Mainly because all the politicians lived in D.C. and Shenandoah is close to D.C. It was an easier park to develop because the mountains aren't really that high. It's not that rugged. So the Smokies boosters just said that this will not stand. So we will not settle for not having a national park in the Smokies. So they talked to all their elected officials in Congress, and they said, "I want you to block that Shenandoah bill. I want you to make sure that it never even comes to the House floor for a vote." So they said, "We will." And then word got out about that, and pretty soon the Southern Appalachian National Park Commission and the Secretary of Interior, they all met up and said, "Well, this is kind of serious. Maybe they might keep us from having any national parks at all." So they got back together and they came out with a new decision, and that was that Shenandoah is still the winner of the pageant, but Great Smoky Mountains will be the first runner-up, and we might even make Mammoth Cave a national park too. You ever wonder who these Monopoly little illustrations are based on? Yeah, all those Gilded Age tycoons. That was here. And of course, they were trying to create monopolies. And then they had the trust busting and all that. Just a short aside there. So they got the green light to create Great Smoky Mountains National Park, but they had even greater obstacles ahead. One of which was every single acre of the Great Smoky Mountains were in private ownership. Pretty daunting task that. Every single acre was in private ownership. And you think you're going to make this into a national park. Most of it was owned by the timber companies, but as you well know, a lot of it was owned by small farms, like something like 1,100 small farms. And they were going to have to raise $10 million, which is equivalent to $186 million in 2026. That's how much they were going to have to raise to buy all that land. Anybody here ever do any fundraising? That's a pretty big ask, isn't it? $186 million. But these, you know how people were in the 20s. They were undaunted. They were optimistic. They said, bully this and bully that. We'll raise it. They started locally. They went to the school kids. They got them to pony up their nickels and dimes. They went to the churches, passed one plate for the church, one plate for the park. They went to the hotels. They had the bellhops empty their pockets of their tips. They said, "Don't worry, we'll have more hotels soon. You'll be so wealthy you can't even imagine it now." They went around to all the towns, Tennessee and North Carolina. Their goal was to raise $1 million locally. After about 2 years, they were coming up on their deadline, and the one major area that hadn't met their goal yet was Knoxville, of all places. They were still about 20 grand short, and here was the deadline. So the mayor, Ben Morton, said, "Citizens, this is one of the most important causes we've ever undertaken here in East Tennessee, in Western North Carolina. I'm not going to settle for defeat. Starting tomorrow, I'm going to ask that nobody goes to work until we come up with that final 20 grand. And of course, all the employees were, yeah! But the employers had a different perspective, and they coughed up the last 20 grand, and they'd reached the 10% mark in their fundraising. Then they went to the states. They went to Tennessee. They went to North Carolina. They wanted $2 million each. North Carolina especially was reluctant because they had such a big logging industry in North Carolina. But they kind of played them up against each other. Well, you know, Tennessee will do it if you do it, and vice versa. And they also said, tell you what, you don't even have to write a check right now. Just make a pledge. And even some of the first $1 million was just a pledge. Just pledge, Tennessee and North Carolina, $2 million each, and maybe the bill will never come due, because what you're pledging is that we're going to find a match for all this money. Once we get this first $5 million, even though most of it's just pledges, we're going to find a match, another $5 million, $93 million in 2026 money, and that's when the bill will come due. That's when you'll have to write the check. So their plan after that was called the National Campaign, and they'd had a guy named Major Welch working, you know, New York, Boston, Washington area, trying to raise money. He was actually trying to raise money for both Shenandoah and Great Smoky Mountains, which made the task almost impossible. And when they asked him how much of the $5 million they needed for the match he'd raised, he said, "Sorry, boys and girls, but the number is zero." He had $0 raised. And here was all, you know, one thing you never want in a capital campaign is to get halfway through it and then to stall out. Bad things started happening. And when the timber companies started cutting faster because they knew the park might be coming, and it was a royal mess. Fortunately, there was a guy who knew a guy, Arno B. Kammerer, from Mount Kammerer, as you know, the assistant director of the National Park Service, had been working with Rockefeller Jr. all these years in Acadia, building those carriage roads, developing the park, buying more lands, adjusting the boundaries. They become really close. They become close friends. Like I said, Jr. was practically a member of the National Park Service. He started hitting Jr. up for the final $5 million. And Junior had never been here before. So it was a hard sell. And, you know, Junior kind of just kept on dodging him. And they finally set up a meeting in Manhattan at the Standard Oil headquarters, late in 1927. The fundraising program was just completely stalled out. And they had this meeting in Manhattan, and didn't go very well. Junior was just like super busy that day. He was such an incredible philanthropist. You know, he was building Colonial Williamsburg. He was building one of the largest churches in New York. He was building museums all over. He was curing diseases, building these colleges, and finally they left Kammerer waiting in the waiting room for 90 minutes. And finally said, "Well, Junior's got 20 minutes for lunch. Why don't you talk to him then? Run in there right now. Tell him what you've got to offer with this Great Smoky Mountains thing." So I ran in there over lunch. Of course, Junior, what did he want to talk about? Carriage roads, Acadia, always with the carriage roads. 20 minutes were up, and the Junior's assistants came in and said, Mr. Rockefeller, the meeting started. You have to get out of here." And so he got up to leave, and Kammerer said, "Well, what about the Great Smoky Mountains? You know, we're in a real pickle here." Said, "Oh yeah, the Great Smoky Mountains. Sorry about that. So sorry. Tell you what, why don't you write me a letter? Tell me about these Great Smoky Mountains, because I've never been there. Don't know what you're talking about. Don't know how much they're going to cost." So he had to write him a letter. Like 5 days later, 5 days later, he pounded out this letter, and it was a really good letter. This was a $93 million letter. The National Park Service had the actual knowledge of what a visit to Western parks meant to the lucky ones. It brought to the individual and his family a breath of the outdoors and a vision of the best that God made in this country, and a realization that a country that is reserving such areas and maintaining them for the benefit of its citizens was a pretty good country to live in. A pretty good country to live in. I like that line. Found out recently he actually stole that from Frederick Law Olmsted, who wrote it about Yosemite. But he clicked. It was actually a very long letter. He checked all of Junior's boxes, and he even mentioned that Junior being a teetotaler, he would get rid of some of those moonshiners out around the Cosby area, which Kammerer and David Chapman had visited on several occasions just to scope out. So that's, from a teetotaler's perspective, that was another plus to buying the Smoky Mountains. And he finally said yes. And Junior didn't come himself. He was a very shy person. He never showed up for any of the ceremonies. Like when Roosevelt dedicated the Smokies at Newfound Gap in 1940, you think if anybody would be there, it'd be John D. Rockefeller Jr. He wasn't there. Couldn't make it. Never showed up for any of that stuff. Very, very shy, very, very humble. He sent one of his assistants down to Knoxville with a check for $5 million, and his assistant said it was just like Armistice Day. People just poured out of their houses. They poured onto the streets. The church bells were ringing. The factory whistles were blowing. The train whistles were blowing. The front page of all the newspapers were nothing but the Smokies and this gift and how great things are going to be and how their property values were going to go up, how everybody was going to be rich. And that was 1928, 1934, we got our national park. Final park I'm going to talk about tonight is Yellowstone. 1924, just a year after Ann and Willis were there, the Rockefellers come to Yellowstone. And who's waiting for them there but Horace Albright? He's the superintendent of Yellowstone, and he's also the assistant director of the National Park Service. So during the summer, he's the superintendent of Yellowstone. During the winter, he goes to Washington and runs all the other national parks. He's probably one of those non-productive federal employees you've heard about recently. He really liked to get things done. Rockefeller really liked to get things done. That's one reason they got along so well. I mean, they like to get things done, got to get them done right and get them finished. So Albright's plan was to talk Junior into buying the Grand Teton Mountains and adding them to Yellowstone National Park. It's quite a scheme. He'd been working with a grassroots citizens group for about 10 years, and he came up with this screwy itinerary for the Rockefeller family. They only had 3 days to see all of Yellowstone National Park, and he directed them to go from the north end all the way to the south end, something like 90 miles, then 20 miles further on bad wagon roads, just to take a look at the Grand Teton Mountains. So they did that. They went all the way there. They looked at the mountains. They came all the way back, kind of blew their vacation just driving down these dusty roads. And when they were there, of course, Albright was waiting for them. And he expected them to say, oh, those Tetons, there's something. We really got to save those. He didn't say a word about the Tetons. Rockefeller Jr. didn't mention the Tetons, not one word. So went on to Glacier. They went on a 10-day horsepacking trip in Glacier National Park. So, of course, Albright was devastated. But a couple weeks later, he gets a letter with a Maine postmark on it. It's from John D. Rockefeller Jr. He rips it open, and of course, he's expecting it to be something about, I've been thinking about those Tetons. We really ought to save those for a park. Not a word about those Grand Tetons. What he did say is like, your roadsides look like heck. Junior's a landscape architect. This was Yellowstone National Park, our first national park, and the roads looked horrible. When they cleared the roads, they just piled everything up on the sides. They ran utility wires down both sides of the road. This was in the early days of the Park Service when they wanted people to see the parks in their cars, and they never even got around to cleaning up the roadside. So he told Albright, maybe I could chip in a little money, help you pay for this cleanup. And Albright, being a very, very wise person, Junior made the same offer to some other people, and they usually said, I don't think we can do that. That's private funds. I'm a government guy. I don't think that'll happen. Albright wasn't like that at all. He said, I was just saying to my wife, Grace, this morning, I wish we could clean up those roadsides. Nothing bugs me more than those messy roadsides. And not only am I going to say yes to this, I've already hired a crew. We've already gone out on the roadsides. We've already cleared test strips In about 3 weeks, I'm going to tell you how much it's going to cost to clean up every road in Yellowstone, how many people are going to be involved, and how long it's going to take. It's going to be like spreadsheets, and there'll be all these details and photos and maps, and that's just stuff Junior, kind of being an accountant, bean counter brain, he just loved those details, just loved to dig into those details. So they got along really well. They cleaned up all the roadsides. They did such a good job, it became like a example of what all the other national parks were going to do with their roadsides. And then even the states started to do that. So Rockefeller's there in 1926, shows them the cleaned up roadsides. They're looking good. There's wildflowers growing there for the first time. But Horace Albright, being Horace Albright, what does he want to do? Head south to those Grand Tetons again. And he takes them right through Jackson Hole this time. And it looks, if you think the roadsides were messy, Jackson Hole looked like a failed Las Vegas strip. It was just like they tried to do a tourism industry there, but it just never really gained traction. The season's so short. So there was like a burned out gas station. There were falling down cabins. There were billboards everywhere. They put the utility lines between the road and the mountains, so you couldn't even take a decent picture. And the Rockefellers were just appalled. You know, this is one of the most beautiful places in the world, and it's just getting all junked up. And so Rockefeller, or Albright, took him to this place where Ansel Adams took this photo and told him all about this plan that some of the citizens had about creating Grand Teton National Park, and how they just needed some money to do so. And he explained the whole thing, and then he looked at Junior and Abby, and they didn't say a word, not one word. A couple weeks later, though, they started corresponding. Horace Albright, John D. Rockefeller Jr. began sending back letters. Throughout their lifetimes, they exchanged 1,300 letters and telegrams. If you can imagine it, 1,300. That's how close. And he was that way with Kammerer too, and he was that way with Mather. They just really got along. They had a common cause, and they liked working on it. And they scheduled a meeting in Manhattan at the Standard Oil headquarters. And this part of the story is so important that we've actually dramatized it. And we've got some professional actors we've brought in from LA. And they are going to tell you what happened when these two got together. And a little background. Once Horace Albright started poking around in Jackson Hole and getting estimates on buying land, it actually ended up being a lot more expensive than he thought it was going to be. So when he came to New York City to meet with Rockefeller, he actually had some bad news to report. It was a lot more expensive than he thought. He was feeling kind of sheepish at the time, that he was going to get chewed out by Junior.
Come on, Mr. Rockefeller. Now, these are the 14,000 acres of land in Jackson Hole. We're going to need to purchase them. Now, by working with the local realtors and bankers, we estimate the cost to be $400,000. Now, I know that's higher than we discussed earlier.
Mr. Albright, is this all there is?
Well, this is the property we've been working on.
Yeah. No. That isn't what I had in mind at all.
Oh.
You took us that afternoon to a hill where we looked over the mountains and the whole valley. I remember you used the word dream. That's the area for which I wanted you to get cost estimates. The family is only interested in an ideal project, and it would please me very much if you could get me a data on that.
Boy, it might cost you as much as $1.5 million or $2 million to buy all that land.
Well, of course. But that is what I'm interested in. I'm only interested in the ideal proposition. I would like to know what the land on both sides of the river and to the north.
All right, mister.
Bravo! Let's give a big hand to our players. So Albright, when he left the office, he said he felt like he was walking on air. And he went back and got those revised estimates and gave them to Junior, and Junior just said, okay, let's do it. So they formed the Snake River Land Company and started buying Jackson Hole, just kind of ranch by ranch. Things went along pretty well because Jackson Hole was a pretty lousy place to raise cattle. If you've been there, it's cold, it's dry, it's snowy, and a lot of people were more than happy to sell. But then as time went on, people started wondering, who exactly is this Snake River Land Company? And somebody discovered, they kind of assumed it was like a big cattle company or somebody. It was like one of them, but it was actually a gazillionaire from back east and the National Park Service. So the local people kind of felt like they'd been hoodwinked, and they were pretty pissed. And so they did everything they could to fight this national park now. They even started a second newspaper in the town of Jackson. Town of Jackson, like 800 people, had a second newspaper where every single story was about how we got to stop this national park thing from happening. They had a congressional investigation. Senators come to Jackson Hole in August, of course, when it's, how's the weather in Washington in August? Not so nice. How's the weather in Jackson in August? Very nice. Congress just poured down into Jackson Hole, did this investigation, couldn't find any problems with the way the Snake River Land Company obtained their land, felt they'd been paid a fair price. And then Horace Albright quits the Park Service. 1933, been doing this quite a long time. He was burned out. He was tired. He was tired of working for peanuts. And he just wanted to go to California, raise his family, get a job as a lawyer, work normal hours, and quit this crazy Park Service stuff. So now, and Stephen Mather, the director of the Park Service, had died by now too. So all of a sudden, Junior was kind of on his own now. Remember when you got this card in Monopoly? Late in the game? That was a killer. That was a killer. And that's the way Junior was. He owned 29,000 acres of land in Jackson Hole. They had to pay taxes on, that he had to maintain the roads, he had to maintain a lot of the buildings. It was just a waste of money, he felt. I was just paying it out year after year. Congress would not take the land for the national park, mainly because it pissed off the ranchers, and they communicated to their elected officials that no, we're against this. So year after year, he kept on paying taxes on this land, and till 1943. And then he came up with a scheme with Horace Albright. But didn't I just say that Horace Albright had quit the Park Service? He had quit the Park Service, but whatever job he got back in California must not have been very demanding, because he still spent an incredible amount of time trying to get this Jackson Hole thing finished and working on other park projects. He was always lobbying in Congress. So Albright and Rockefeller came up with a scheme to give the Secretary of Interior an ultimatum: either take this land or I'm going to sell it. It was probably a bluff, because Junior did the same thing in Acadia when people were fighting one of the roads he wanted to build. So I'm pretty sure he wouldn't have done that. But it was a good bluff, and FDR, president at the time, 1943, said, okay, I don't want to see this gift go to waste. I will create Grand Teton National Monument. You can create a national monument without Congress's consent with the 1906 Antiquities Act. So both Acadia and Grand Tetons started out as national monuments, then became national parks. So FDR declares a national monument, problem solved, fight over, right? Sorry, but not even close. So this galvanized the opposition even further. They fought back even harder, came up with this great PR stunt where they got the highest paid actor in Hollywood at the time, Wallace Beery, who'd shot 2 Westerns in Jackson. He organized a posse with some of his buddies, and they got on their horses and they drove 5,000 head of cattle right through the middle of this new national monument in protest. And of course, all the reporters were there. It was like radio broadcasts. The newsreels were going. It was on every newspaper, every magazine. about this, these brave cowboys fighting the federal government and the gazillionaires back east. And of course, who did the public side with? I mean, look at those guys. They got the cool horses, they've got the cool hats, they've got the 6-shooters, they've got the rifles across their saddle there. Everybody just thought the cowboys were so cool, and the cowboys must be right, and this Rockefeller guy must be wrong. So more hard years for our man John D. Rockefeller Jr. trying to create Grand Teton National Park. Till finally, World War II ended. There was no more gas rationing, no more tire rationing. The economy was booming. People had been cooped up. They wanted to get out, wanted to see the sights. They went west. They came to the Grand Tetons, but it wasn't a national monument yet. The Congress continued to block the actual establishment and funding of the monument, even though the president had declared it. So there's no facilities there. But meanwhile, in the town of Jackson, the cash registers were ringing, the hotels were full, the restaurants were full, people were making money, the bank accounts were getting big, the land values were going up, and the local people started to think, there just might be something to this tourism thing. Ranching is not an easy way to make a living, and these tourists it seems like it's a lot easier to shear a tourist than it is to shear a sheep. And then you don't have to feed. Yeah, so you people understand this, yeah. And you don't have to feed them all winter either. So that's the economic value, or explanation for why it finally ended. The more romantic reason for why it ended, as I mentioned, that Junior this whole time was maintaining these buildings. He actually did a historic structure inventory. One of the buildings they wanted to restore was this Meaner's Ferry. It used to be the only way across the Snake River if you were going from the valley of Jackson Hole to the town of Jackson. So all the ranchers and stuff used this ferry. It's a really cool ferry. It was kind of like the Mills and the Smokies. It was like a reason to get together with your neighbors and talk and swap pocket knives and things like that. So when they started restoring it, the local people got really excited. And they restored it the right way. They had all the local people bring in their photos and their stories, and they got really excited about it. So they decided to have this grand opening, the grand reopening of Meaner's Ferry, once they got it running again. And everybody showed up. The governor showed up. There were hundreds of people there. The governor of Wyoming came. And the very first ferry to go across that Snake River had the oldest of the old timers on it. And the reporter said tears were just running down their cheeks and was all over. They said to the park proponents, we never knew you cared about us local people. We thought all you cared about was your stupid national park. So there's a good lesson there, isn't there, in the conservation business. But that's just a sliver of what's in my book, and just a sliver of what John D. Rockefeller and Kammerer and all these people, these grassroots citizens groups accomplished during the 1920s. He bought Linville Gorge and Falls for the Parkway, did a lot at Mesa Verde, saved thousands and thousands of acres of virgin redwood forest, was the biggest contributor for Shenandoah, saved 11,000 acres of sugar pine trees in Yosemite, built a lot of the park museums, gave over $800 million in 2026 dollars for the national parks during his lifetime. But most importantly, he proved that to run, for a national park to exist, it always requires partnerships. It's not just the federal government. It's not just the local people. It's philanthropists and groups like yours, people working together. What was that answer to that $5 million question? Definitely his strong sense of Christian duty. He just felt like he had all this money, and he owed it to God to do the right thing with that money. To do it for the mission statement for Rockefeller Philanthropy was for the good of humankind. He was a landscape architect. That really helped him meld with the Park Service. He loved nature, especially trees, big trees. He recognized national parks as part of the family mission. and really trust. Just this trust that developed between Rockefeller and the Park Service and these citizens groups, because they acted responsibly. They got a lot of bang. He got a lot of bang for his buck with the national parks, and they used his money responsibly. So that was the 1920s. Now it's the 2020s. And we've got our own set of challenges. Park visitation, you probably never noticed around here, but it just keeps on going up and up and up. Staffing's down 40% since 2010. There's still a hiring freeze in place, which is having a huge impact on park operations in the Smokies this year. You won't like when you hear the date for Roaring Fork Motor Nature Trail to open this year. And you know, it's not like we can't afford this. All those national parks, from Hawaii to Alaska to Florida to Maine, all those parks cost 1/15 of 1% of the U.S. federal budget for operations. There's a few other costs, but 1/15 of one. And I challenge you to even find that in the federal budget. Even with your best reader glasses on and your best magnifying glass, I challenge you to find the National Park Service line item in that 2,000-page document. So it's not really like we can't afford it. I mean, how do we fix this? I don't know if you've been to the Smokies recently in the summertime, but it's quite a place. It's very different than when I came here in 1987. I volunteer at Sugarland's Visitor Center. I can tell you during at least half the year, by the time we open our doors, the parking lot's full. Anybody who comes in will want to go to Grotto Falls, not going to happen. Rainbow Falls, not going to happen. Alum Cave, not going to happen. Kauai, not going to happen. Why not going to happen? Why? Because the parking lot filled like 3 hours ago. If you would have gotten up at 4, you might have found a place to park for Rainbow Falls or Alum Cave. And that's just it all day long. People driving around looking for parking places. And it's sad. You know, what's the solution? Some people went to reservation system, which at least kind of keeps this from happening, but reservations aren't perfect either, because a lot of people don't get them. You know from the Firefly lottery, right? Your chances of seeing those fireflies at Elkmont every year are pretty slim. And the same thing happens with the reservation system. You know, reservations open up at 8 a.m. on this day. By 8:01, all the reservations for that month are gone. So I actually think the best solution is to create more national parks. Remember those 30 parks that people wanted to create are in the areas like Grandfather Mountain and Linville Falls and all those beautiful areas? They're all still there. I mean, national parks, you get great return on investment with national parks. You know, they cost our federal government $3 billion a year. They create $50 billion in revenue, taxable revenue every year. Provide all these jobs. The biological benefits are great. You know, they preserve all those species. Just in the Smokies, we estimate there's probably 60,000 different species of plants and animals just in the Great Smoky Mountains. I mean, just preserving that's an amazing thing. Of course, they're absorbing carbon dioxide all the time. They make us happy. National parks are great. We get outdoors. We immediately just feel better about everything. And look at what a great country we live in. The amount of scenery we have, the Cascades, the Sierra Nevadas, the Rocky Mountains, the Great Plains, the Great Lakes. New England, why don't we have any big national parks in New England? The Appalachian Mountains. Appalachian Mountains go all the way from Maine to northern Alabama. We have a few small parks, but they're all pretty small parks. And if it's such a great idea, why isn't it happening? Well, it actually is happening, but it's just not enough of it yet. Have you ever heard of Burt's Bees, those products? The woman who started that, and she started out just like the Rockefellers, like a roadside stand selling honey with Burt beside the road, just like a boiled peanut stand here. Grew this, made bazillions of dollars. It really didn't have any use for it, so she bought all this land, gave it to us, gave it to the National Park Service for Katahdin Woods and Water National Monument, which is at the end of the northern end of the Appalachian Trail there. Purchase Knob in the Smokies. That's one of the best places to watch sunrise in the Smokies. It's on top of a mountain. The family gave over 500 acres to the national park just because they'd gotten older and they weren't using it anymore. They didn't want to see it all chopped up and developed. They gave it to the park, and they gave the park an endowment, so they have the money to take care of. Okefenokee Swamp just got expanded from money from Patagonia. There's a Republican congressman in Florida who wants to make a national park on some of these Florida springs. What do we need to do? Contact our elected officials. It worked then, it still works now. Support your friends groups, your park partners. You get a lot of bang for your buck with these park partners. They do amazing things. Friends groups, Discover Life in America, Smokies Life, Tremont, get a lot of bang for your buck. Volunteer like I do, support like the Sierra Club, the National Parks Conservation Association, but most importantly, keep on enjoying your national parks, keep on exploring, because as the great writer Wallace Stegner said, the national parks are the best idea we ever had. Absolutely American, absolutely democratic. They reflect us at our best rather than our worst. So that's my show. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Any questions? Any answers?
I have a small little device here, so if everybody does, I can hand it to you. Anybody have any questions? Sir? Okay. I'll come right on over.
I couldn't help but notice you mentioned TR, the original conservationist, Teddy Roosevelt. Now, one thing I've noticed reading over the history of the conservation movement is it's changed a good deal from TR to the current era. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but Teddy Roosevelt wanted to preserve it so he could use it and go hunting, mainly.
Wow, he didn't need 99 national forests to go hunting.
Well, I simplified, and now we're thinking less exploitation and more of the enjoyment of the pristine wilderness. Have I misreading that? Or what I'm getting at is, how did John D. Rockefeller's view of conservation compare to our current view of conservation?
Oh, he wasn't a hunter or fisherman, but he actually supported the national forests as well. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, there were more horse trails in national forests, and he loved riding horses.
So he was a preservationist, not just a hunter as well. And Rockefeller, you would agree with that too. He was.
I never gave a whole lot of thought to that. I think he got into the national parks because of the people, and just the fact that he was in Acadia at the right time and the right place, and that kind of drew him into the national parks. But I don't know that much about what he felt about national forests. I know he offered to help them clean up their trails, which they could definitely use. But that's a good question. That's a good question. He did some other conservation work outside of the national parks too. Corkscrew Swamp, some other places. So it wasn't all just national parks. I'll think about that. I'll have a better answer in just a minute.
When I hear monuments, I think of a marble something. If you use that term in regard to one of the areas, what's the difference?
Good question. National monuments are managed about the same way as national parks. The reason the 1906 Antiquities Act was created was because of a lot of the areas in the Southwest that were being overrun by pot hunters and people, stealing artifacts and things. It was happening really fast. Somebody would discover this canyon, and pot hunters and everything would just be up there, with picks and shovels, and same thing with Yellowstone. First thing they did, Yellowstone was created, was head there with their wagons and their picks and shovels. So the Antiquities Act was really created to save those historic cultural sites right away. I mean, you could do it in a week, and then you could start sending, what they just sent was the U.S. Army, the cavalry there, in the early days to start protecting those places from pot hunters and vandals and raiders and things. So it was done there, and then it was expanded to not just cultural sites, but also scientific sites. And it's still controversial. If you've heard of Bear's Ear and Grand Escalante Staircase, still having the same fight right now that they had back then. Those were national monuments.
When is a pot hunter?
A pot hunter.
What is
Yeah,
it?
well, Native Americans made all these great pots and arrowheads and things. In the Southwest, there's thousands and thousands of pots. So they would go in there and just loot and just clean them out. They would go into these canyons and these old houses. You've seen Mesa Verde, those cliff houses and stuff. They went in there with wagons and just all day long, just hauled off pots. Yeah.
Also
Fossils, yeah, fossils, yeah, petrified forests, places like that. Yeah, as soon as those places were discovered, man, they were looted as fast as they could.
So when did the national forests come into play?
Oh, during Teddy Roosevelt did that, and so it was early 1900s. The wildlife refuges and the national forests. He was really big on there. Did a few national parks, but mostly the national forests, the preserves, the bird sanctuaries. He was really big on birds. Yeah.
If you had to pick one place that you know about in the southeast in our area that would make a good next national park besides the Smokies,
Oh, probably Grandfather Mountain, Linville Gorge, Linville Falls. Yeah, but there's a bunch of them. I mean, even in West Virginia, there's some virgin forest and Roan Mountain. Roan Mountain's a great one. I think actually the standards. There's only so many Grand Canyons and Grand Tetons, but I think as we go on, as our population continues to grow and so much of the world is developed, it doesn't take much to have a beautiful preserve or park. You give me a county park with some trees and a creek and some trails and some birds, I'm pretty happy. Pretty happy. It doesn't have to be spectacular. It just has to be protected.
Big South Fork is amazing.
It is. It is. It really is. It really is. Whole Cumberland Plateau. I mean, that area is huge. And all these areas, it's not like you're taking it away from miners or farmers or something like that. All the national parks were pretty well vetted. That they were there weren't any minerals there or anything like that.
I'm gonna do one more question to wrap up. In your line of work, how often did you discuss possibly ghost towns becoming national parks? Because they're just sitting there and not being used mostly.
Well, a lot of them have been preserved. Yeah, a lot of them have been preserved as National Historic Sites.
Okay.
A lot, yeah. A lot of National Historic Sites out
What was your favorite
Small.
one?
What's that?
What's your favorite one?
National Historic Site?
Yes, well, Ghost Town specifically. That has become a national.
Ghost.
historic site.
Oh, jeez. Come on, Kayla. Oh, what do we have? Anybody else know of a National Historic Site that's kind of an old mining town? Or
Is Boot Hill National Historic?
I don't know. It could be. It could be. I want to say I know Garnet Ghost
Good
Town
Hill.
in Virginia. Well, a lot of them are state sites, but like Virginia City, is that a national? It probably is. Virginia City is probably a National Historic Site. Yeah, yeah. They're generally old mining grounds. Yeah, and they're pretty cool because people just all left at once. It's not like it was a continuous development. It's like they were built. They were used, and everybody just left at once. And it's like, the coffee cup is still there on the table and stuff.
Yeah. Well, let's thank Steve Kemp for a wonderful presentation.
Thank
Really
you.
was.
Thanks for coming.